You're supposed to be on the plane right now. That's what my wife Saddie would have said if she'd bothered to look up from her phone. But she didn't. She was too busy typing sweet nothings to someone named Max, while I stood in our bedroom doorway with my suitcase, watching her manicured fingers dance across the screen like a pianist playing my funeral march. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, Jake Morrison, 43 years old, built like the ex-fisherman I used to be before I got smart and started fixing boats instead of riding them into storms. Saddie always said I was too literal, too blue-collar for her tastes. Turns out she was right about one thing. I do pay attention to details. Like how she'd started wearing perfume to bed, how she'd suddenly developed a passion for late-night case reviews at the law firm, how she'd bought lingerie I'd never seen her wear, and most importantly, how she'd forgotten that I'd installed that family phone tracker app last Christmas when our son AJ got his first car. Harborview, Maine isn't exactly a metropolis. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody's business, except when they don't want to know. The morning fog rolls in from the Atlantic, mingles with the smell of lobster traps and diesel fuel, and carries secrets like smoke signals. Our house sits on Elm Street, one of those once proud neighborhoods that's seen better decades. The white paint peels like sunburned skin, and Mrs. Lyle next door watches our driveway like it's premium cable television. I'd built my marine repair business from nothing but calloused hands and a willingness to work 16-hour days. Saddie climbed the ladder at Harborview's biggest law firm, Blackstone and Associates, trading her small-town accent for courtroom polish and her husband's attention for billable hours. Somewhere along the way, we'd become strangers sharing a mortgage, but strangers don't usually know each other's passwords. "Honey, I'm heading out," I called from the hallway, loud enough for her to hear, soft enough to sound normal. She mumbled, still typing. Safe flight. Except I wasn't flying anywhere. The Portland conference was real enough. I'd registered, booked the hotel, even packed my bag. But when you hear your wife whispering, "I can't wait to feel you inside me," to someone who definitely isn't you, priorities shift. I loaded my truck and drove exactly 3 blocks to Frankie's gym, where my old friend let me park in the back alley. Frankie Delacroix used to box professionally before his left hook met someone's right cross one too many times. Now he trained local kids and served as Harborview's unofficial therapist for men whose lives had gone sideways. "Trouble in paradise?" Frankie asked when I walked in carrying my suitcase. "Paradise burned down," I said. "I'm just watching the ashes." The gym smelled like sweat, leather, and broken dreams. Perfect atmosphere for planning revenge. I'd spent enough time here over the years to know every creaking floorboard, every water stain on the ceiling. It felt more like home than home did. Saddie's phone showed she'd left the house at 10:47 a.m. The GPS tracker put her at Lakeside Rentals on Harbor Road. Interesting choice for a legal consultation. I gave her an hour head start, then drove my pickup down to the lake. The rental office sat empty except for a bored teenager playing games on his phone. "Help you?" he asked without looking up. "Yeah, my buddy Max rented a cabin. Tall guy, drives a Porsche, thinks his shit doesn't stink. Said I should meet him there, but I forgot the cabin number." The kid's face lit up with recognition. "Oh, that guy. Yeah, he's in cabin 12. Down the path, last one on the right. Nice car." "Nice car," I agreed. "Real nice." Cabin 12 sat at the end of a gravel road, tucked between pine trees like a dirty secret. Max's silver Porsche gleamed in the afternoon sun, parked next to Saddie's Honda. Through the window, I could see movement, shadows dancing against drawn curtains. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, engine off, listening to the lake lap against the shore. Funny how peaceful betrayal could look from the outside. Just another couple enjoying an afternoon by the water. Except one of them was wearing my anniversary gift, those pearl earrings I'd saved 3 months to buy. The smart play would have been to call a lawyer, file for divorce, split everything down the middle like civilized adults. But I'd never been accused of being smart. Saddie made that clear every time she corrected my grammar at dinner parties or laughed a little too hard when her lawyer friends made jokes about blue-collar intelligence. Instead, I reached into my truck bed and grabbed the cooler full of fish guts I'd been meaning to dump at the marina. Old lobster bait, some cod heads, a few pounds of bait fish that had seen better days. The smell could knock a buzzard off a garbage truck. I also grabbed the gas can I kept for emergency fill-ups, still half full. The cabin door wasn't locked. Why would it be? They weren't expecting company. "Jesus Christ!" Max's voice carried through the thin walls. "What the hell are you doing here?" I pushed through the door like I owned the place. Saddie sat on the couch, clutching a sheet to her chest, her face white as fresh snow. Max stood in his boxers, all 6'2" of his perfectly tanned, gym-sculpted body trembling like a chihuahua in a thunderstorm. Well, I said, setting down the cooler and gas can. Apparently Max likes his women in my fishing shirts. Saddie was indeed wearing my old Grundon's shirt, the one I'd bought in Alaska 20 years ago, back when I still believed in things like loyalty and marriage vows. "Jake, I can explain," Saddie started. "Oh, I bet you can. You're a lawyer. Explaining away inconvenient truths is what you do." I opened the cooler, and the smell of rotten fish filled the cabin. But right now, I'm more interested in Max's explanation. Max tried to puff up his chest, probably remembering some movie where the other man stands his ground and wins the girl. "Look, Morrison, this doesn't have to get ugly." I laughed, a sound like grinding gears. "Ugly?" "Brother, we passed ugly about 6 months ago when you started screwing my wife. Now we're in beautiful territory. Beautiful, honest, crystal clear territory." I picked up the first handful of fish guts and walked toward his Porsche. "See, Max, I've been thinking about honesty a lot lately. How it's supposed to be the foundation of marriage. How trust is supposed to mean something." "Don't you dare touch my car!" "Your car?" I smeared cod liver across his windshield. "Funny thing about possessions, Max. They can disappear so quickly." Saddie found her voice. "Jake, stop this right now. You're acting insane." "Insane?" I dumped the rest of the fish guts across Max's hood, watching the silver paint disappear under a layer of organic revenge. Insane would be pretending I didn't know. Insane would be playing the fool while you two laugh about the stupid fisherman who can't satisfy his wife. Max made a move toward me, but I was ready. 20 years of hauling nets and wrestling with marine engines had left me with hands like vice grips and reflexes that hadn't slowed down much. I caught his wrist and twisted just enough to make him yelp. "Easy, Romeo. We're just talking." I reached for the gas can and started pouring it over the fish guts on his car. The smell of gasoline mixed with rotting seafood created an aroma that would haunt nightmares. "You're crazy," Max screamed. "That's my car. That's a $60,000 car." "Was," I corrected, pulling out my lighter. "Now it's a very expensive mistake." Saddie jumped up from the couch, sheet wrapped around her like a toga. "Jake, please. Think about what you're doing." I flicked the lighter, and the small flame danced in the afternoon breeze. "I am thinking, sweetheart. I'm thinking about choices, about consequences, about how every action has an equal and opposite reaction." I looked at Max, who'd gone pale as a January morning. "Here's the thing, Max. You've got a choice to make. Either you choose by yourself, or I will. Tick-tock." "Choose what?" His voice cracked like a teenager's. "Whether you want to keep screwing my wife, or whether you want to keep your pretty little life intact, your car, your reputation, your partnership at the firm, your membership at the country club, all of it balanced on the head of a pin." I held the lighter closer to the gasoline-soaked car. "What's it going to be?" Max looked at Saddie, then back at me, then at his car dripping with fish guts and gasoline. "You're insane. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead. Tell them how you were screwing another man's wife in a rented cabin and he showed up with some fish bait. I'm sure they'll be very sympathetic." Saddie stepped between us, her lawyer instincts finally kicking in. "Jake, this solves nothing. We can work this out like adults." "Adults?" I laughed again. "Adults don't sneak around behind their spouse's back for 6 months. Adults don't rent cabins for afternoon quickies. Adults don't lie about working late while they're actually working under someone else." I clicked the lighter shut and slipped it back into my pocket. "But you're right about one thing, Saddie. This doesn't solve anything. This is just the opening statement." I walked to the cabin's small garage and found exactly what I was looking for: a chain and padlock, probably left by some previous renter. I wrapped the chain around the garage door handles and snapped the lock shut. "Max, you're going to stay here and think about choices. Saddie, you're going to go home and think about consequences. And I'm going to go think about what comes next." I headed for the door, then turned back. "Oh, and Max? You might want to call a detail shop. That smell's going to linger." Outside, I carved a message into the ice forming on the dock's edge with my truck key. "You're next." Then I drove home, leaving them to figure out how to explain the smell, the locked garage, and the sudden shift in the balance of power. Mrs. Lyle was watering her plants when I pulled into the driveway, and she waved like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The old Jake Morrison, the one who fixed other people's boats and ignored his own sinking marriage, was gone. The new Jake Morrison was just getting started. Harborview's gossip network operated faster than fiber optic internet. By the time I'd showered and cracked open a beer, my phone was buzzing with text messages from half the town. Mrs. Lyle had apparently seen Saddie come home in tears, driving like a bat out of hell with her clothes all wrinkled. "Heard there was some excitement at the lake today," Frankie said when I answered his call. "Small towns," I replied, "where even your secrets gossip about you." "You want to talk about it?" "Nothing to talk about yet, but keep the heavy bag free tomorrow. I might need to work out some frustration." Saddie didn't come home that night, or the next morning. Her car sat in the driveway like evidence of guilt, but she'd apparently found somewhere else to lick her wounds. Probably Max's place, assuming he'd managed to get out of that garage and find someone to defish his Porsche. The silence in the house felt different now. Not empty, purposeful. Like the calm before a storm that everyone knows is coming. I spent the morning at my shop pretending to focus on rebuilding a boat engine while actually planning my next move. The marine repair business had taught me patience. Engines didn't fix themselves overnight, and neither did broken marriages. But unlike engines, marriages sometimes couldn't be fixed at all. Sometimes they just needed to be scrapped for parts. Around noon, AJ showed up at the shop. My son had inherited his mother's height and my stubborn streak, a combination that had gotten him through high school football and into a decent state college. At 21, he was old enough to understand that his parents' marriage had been running on fumes for years. "Dad, what the hell happened yesterday?" I looked up from the engine block I'd been pretending to examine. "Your mother didn't tell you?" "Mom's not talking. She's staying at Aunt Denise's place, crying into wine glasses and muttering about lawyers. Max isn't answering his phone, and Mrs. Lyle is telling everyone who'll listen that you came home looking like you'd won the lottery and lost your mind at the same time. Denise, Saddie's best friend from law school, now a partner at the same firm. They'd been thick as thieves since day one, probably sharing every detail of their lives, including, apparently, Saddie's extracurricular activities. "Your mother and I are having some marital difficulties," I said, which was like calling the Titanic a minor shipping incident. "Cut the crap, Dad. This is Harborview. I heard about the fish guts and the gasoline. Half the town's talking about it." I set down my wrench and really looked at my son. When had he gotten so tall? When had his voice gotten that edge of authority? What do you want me to say, AJ? That I caught your mother cheating and decided to handle it like a civilized adult? That I'm going to quietly file for divorce and split everything 50-50 while she rides off into the sunset with her lawyer boyfriend? I want you to say you're not going to do anything stupid. Too late for that. Stupid would have been pretending I didn't know. Stupid would have been playing the fool while they laughed about the dumb fisherman behind my back. AJ sat down on an overturned crate, suddenly looking younger than his 21 years. So what now? Now your mother and Max get to learn what consequences look like. That afternoon, I drove over to Blackstone and Associates. The law firm occupied a restored Victorian mansion on Main Street, all gleaming hardwood and intimidating leather-bound books. Saddie's Honda was in the parking lot, along with Max's Porsche, which, I noted with satisfaction, still smelled faintly of low tide despite what must have been an expensive cleaning job. I didn't go inside. Instead, I parked across the street at Murph's Diner and waited. Small-town surveillance was easy when you knew everyone's routines. At 3:30, they emerged together. Max had his hand on Saddie's lower back, that possessive gesture men make when they want the world to know who they're sleeping with. Saddie leaned into him like she'd never leaned into me, not even in our early days when we actually liked each other. They climbed into Max's car and drove toward the upscale part of town, where Max owned a lakefront house that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years. I followed at a distance, my pickup truck invisible among Harborview's working-class traffic. Max's house sat on 2 acres of manicured lawn, complete with a heated swimming pool and a private dock. The kind of place that screamed, "I'm successful and I want everyone to know it." The kind of place that would be very expensive to maintain if something happened to, say, the pool's filtration system. I didn't do anything that day. I just watched and planned and let my anger crystallize into something harder and more useful than rage. That evening, Frankie found me at Murphy's bar, nursing a whiskey and watching the local news. The anchor was talking about some political scandal in Augusta, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was elsewhere, calculating angles and possibilities. "You look like a man with a plan," Frankie said, sliding onto the adjacent bar stool. "Plans are for people who think the system works," I replied. "I'm more interested in creative problem-solving." Frankie ordered a beer and waited. He'd known me long enough to recognize when I was working through something complicated. "You remember when we were kids?" I said finally. "And Billy Thatcher kept stealing our lunch money?" "Yeah. Until you filled his locker with that skunk you found." "Exactly. Sometimes you don't fight fair, sometimes you fight smart." "Jake, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking that Max likes to show off. Big house, fancy car, membership at the country club. What do you think would happen if people found out he wasn't quite as successful as he pretends to be?" Frankie took a long pull from his beer. "What do you know?" "I know that Saddie's been working late on a lot of Max's cases. I know that some of those cases involved real estate deals that went sideways. And I know that Max has been living pretty high for a guy whose biggest clients are small-town developers and divorce cases." "You think he's dirty?" "I think everyone's dirty if you dig deep enough. The question is how deep you're willing to dig." The next morning, I started digging. Harborview's town records were public information, available to anyone willing to spend time in the basement of City Hall with a patient clerk and a lot of coffee. Property transfers, building permits, business licenses. It was all there if you knew how to look. Max had been busy. Over the past 3 years, he'd been involved in a dozen property deals, always representing the buyers, always collecting hefty fees. Nothing illegal about that, except for one small detail. Most of those properties had been purchased by shell companies that traced back to the same offshore account. Interesting. Even more interesting was the fact that several of those properties had been rezoned for commercial development just months after purchase, dramatically increasing their value. I made copies of everything and drove home to find Saddie's car in the driveway. She was sitting at our kitchen table, still wearing yesterday's clothes, looking like she'd aged 5 years in 2 days. "We need to talk," she said when I walked in. "Do we? Because yesterday you seemed pretty busy talking to Max." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "Jake, please, can we try to handle this like adults?" I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. Up close, I could see the damage. Mascara smudged under her eyes, her usually perfect hair hanging limp, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for her own cup. "How long?" I asked. "What?" "How long have you been screwing him? And don't lie to me, Saddie. I'm done with lies." She stared into her coffee like it might contain answers. 6 months, maybe 7. "Why?" "I don't know. I mean, I do know, but it's complicated." "Try me. I'm smarter than I look." That got a reaction. A flash of the old Saddie, the one who used to cut me down with surgical precision. "Don't be sarcastic, Jake. It doesn't suit you." "Neither does being married to a cheater, but here we are." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You stopped seeing me, really seeing me. I became part of the furniture, part of the routine. Wake up, coffee, work, dinner, television, bed, repeat until death." "So you decided to spice things up by sleeping with your colleague." "It wasn't supposed to happen. Max was just..." "He paid attention. He listened when I talked about cases, about my ambitions. He made me feel like I mattered. And I didn't? When was the last time you asked me about my work? Really asked, not just, 'How was your day, honey,' while you read the sports page?" I thought about it and realized she had a point. Somewhere along the way, we'd stopped being married and started being roommates who shared expenses and a last name. "So what now?" I asked. "I want a divorce, clean, simple, no fault. We split everything 50-50 and move on with our lives." I laughed, and the sound made her flinch again. "Clean and simple. Right. What does Max think about that plan?" "Max has nothing to do with this. This is between us." "Max has everything to do with this. He's the reason we're having this conversation." I pulled out the property records I'd copied and spread them across the table. "Did you know your boyfriend's been running a very interesting side business?" Saddie's face went pale as she recognized the documents. As a lawyer, she knew exactly what she was looking at. "Where did you get these?" "Public records. Amazing what you can find when you're not too busy screwing your business partner to pay attention." "Jake, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. Max has been using inside information to buy properties through shell companies, then using his connections to get them rezoned for development. Classic corruption, just small-town style." "You can't prove anything." "Maybe not. But I bet the state attorney general's office would be very interested in taking a closer look, especially if someone filed a complaint with specific property addresses and dates." Saddie stood up so fast her chair fell over. "You bastard! You'd destroy him just to get back at me?" "I'd destroy him because he's a criminal who happens to be screwing my wife. The revenge is just a bonus." She headed for the door, then turned back. "This isn't over, Jake." "No," I agreed. "It's not." After she left, I sat alone in the kitchen, looking at the property records and thinking about choices. Saddie was right about one thing. I had stopped seeing her, stopped making an effort. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. It just explained it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off, or you'll regret it." I texted back, "Regret? Honey, I invented it." Then I called the state attorney general's office and asked to speak to someone about public corruption in small-town Maine. The war was just getting started. The state attorney general's office was very interested in Max's property deals. Interested enough to open a preliminary investigation, which meant Max would soon be receiving some uncomfortable phone calls and document requests. In a town like Harborview, that kind of attention spread faster than a grease fire. I celebrated by driving to Max's house at midnight and releasing 24 live lobsters into his heated swimming pool. The next morning, I was rebuilding a carburetor when Denise walked into my shop. Saddie's best friend and law partner looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Perfectly styled blonde hair, designer suit, shoes that probably cost more than most people's rent. She also looked furious. "We need to talk," she announced, standing in my doorway like an avenging angel in Armani. "Denise, what a pleasant surprise. Come to discuss marine engines? I hear you're in the market for some honest work." Her smile could have frozen the harbor. "Cute, real cute. You think you're clever, don't you?" "I think I'm a guy whose wife was cheating on him with a criminal and who decided to do something about it instead of pretending it wasn't happening." "Max isn't a criminal. The Attorney General's office might disagree. Turns out they take real estate fraud pretty seriously, even in small towns." Denise stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume mixed with desperation. "Listen to me very carefully, Jake. You're playing in a league you don't understand. Saddie is my friend, and Max is my colleague. If you think you can destroy them without consequences, you're even dumber than I thought." "Dumber than you thought?" That's interesting, coming from someone who helped cover up her friend's affair for 6 months. I didn't cover up anything. Saddie's personal life is her own business. Not when it involves fraud and corruption, then it becomes everyone's business. Denise's composure cracked slightly. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Enlighten me." "Back off, Jake. Stop harassing Max. Stop filing false complaints with the state, and stop embarrassing Saddie. Do that, and maybe we can all move forward like civilized people." I set down my wrench and gave her my full attention. "And if I don't? Then you'll regret it. Saddie's not the only one with secrets, and you're not as smart as you think you are." After she left, I sat in my shop, thinking about threats and secrets, and the way Denise's hands had been shaking despite her confident words. Then I called Frankie. "I need a favor," I said when he answered. "What kind of favor?" "The kind that involves your cousin Tony and his security camera business." Tony Delacroix had installed security systems throughout Harborview, including the one at Blackstone and Associates. More importantly, he was the kind of guy who believed in comprehensive documentation and wasn't too particular about privacy laws when it came to helping family friends. "What are you looking for?" Tony asked when we met at Frankie's gym that evening. "I want to know what Max and Saddie have been up to at the office after hours. Specifically, I want to know if they've been accessing files they shouldn't have access to." "That's a lot of footage to review. I'll pay for your time. It's not about money, Jake. It's about what you plan to do with whatever I find. I plan to make sure justice gets served, one way or another." Tony thought about it, then nodded. "Give me a few days." While Tony worked his magic, I focused on more immediate concerns, like the fact that Max's pool now smelled like low tide and crustacean panic, or that Saddie had apparently moved in with Denise temporarily, leaving our house feeling like a museum of a failed marriage. I also focused on the upcoming Harborview Business Association dinner, an annual event where the town's movers and shakers gathered to pat themselves on the back and pretend they were important. Max was scheduled to give a speech about ethics in small-town legal practice, which struck me as ironic given recent developments. The dinner was held at the Harborview Country Club, a venue that had never seen the inside of my wallet until I decided to buy a ticket specifically to watch Max's presentation. I cleaned up as best I could, pressed khakis, button-down shirt, the blazer I'd worn to AJ's high school graduation, not exactly black tie, but respectable enough for a working-class guy crashing the white-collar party. Saddie was there, sitting at Max's table, wearing a blue dress I'd never seen before. She looked beautiful and miserable, like a movie star at a funeral. Max looked nervous, which made sense considering the state investigation had officially launched that morning. I found a seat in the back and waited. Max's speech started predictably enough. Platitudes about integrity, service to the community, the importance of trust between lawyers and clients. Standard lawyer bullshit delivered with practiced sincerity. Then I stood up. "Excuse me," I called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I have a question about ethics." The room went silent. Max's face went pale. Saddie looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. "Mr. Morrison," the association president said nervously, "this isn't really the time for— Actually, it's the perfect time. See, Mr. Maxwell here is giving a speech about ethics while he's under investigation by the state attorney general for real estate fraud. I was wondering how that squares with all this talk about integrity." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Max gripped the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. That's a baseless accusation," Max stammered. "Is it? Because I have copies of property records showing shell company purchases, rezoning applications, and a very interesting pattern of insider trading. Would you like me to share them with everyone?" I pulled out a folder thick with documents and started walking toward the front of the room. "See, folks, Max here has been using his position as a lawyer to buy properties cheap, then using his connections to get them rezoned for development. Classic corruption, just dressed up in a nice suit." "Security!" Max shouted, but the country club's security consisted of one elderly man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Oh, and there's more," I continued, now standing directly in front of Max's table. "He's also been sleeping with my wife for the past 6 months, using information she gathered from confidential client files to identify target properties." Saddie shot to her feet. "That's not true." "Which part? The sleeping together or the using confidential information? Because I have evidence of both." I opened the folder and pulled out photographs. Screenshots from Tony's security footage showing Max and Saddie in the law firm's conference room surrounded by client files at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night 6 weeks ago. "Turns out your boyfriend likes to mix business with pleasure, Saddie, and you were happy to help him commit felonies as long as he kept telling you how smart and beautiful you are." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Max tried to grab the photographs, but I held them out of reach. "You all thought you were dealing with lawyers," I announced to the crowd, "but you're just sharks in suits, except sharks don't screw their own clients." Max finally found his voice. "You're insane! This is harassment!" "This is justice. See, Max, you made a mistake when you decided to steal my wife. You thought I was just some dumb fisherman who wouldn't fight back. But I've been fighting storms and tides and broken engines my whole life. Fighting a couple of corrupt lawyers, that's just Tuesday." I turned to address the room one more time. "Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Harborview's legal community, where ethics are optional and other people's marriages are just another business opportunity." Then I walked out, leaving Max standing at the podium with his mouth hanging open and his reputation in ruins. The next morning, I drove to Max's house to survey the damage. His pool had been drained and was being scrubbed by a professional cleaning crew. His Porsche sat in the driveway with all 4 tires slashed. Probably the work of some outraged client who'd attended the dinner. But the real damage was to his reputation. By noon, the story had spread throughout Harborview. The state investigation was no longer preliminary. It was front-page news in the local paper. 3 clients had already fired the firm, and 2 more were threatening lawsuits. My phone rang as I was watching the cleanup crew work on Max's pool. "You bastard!" Saddie's voice cracked with rage and tears. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've told the truth. Apparently that's more destructive than I realized. The firm fired me, Jake. They fired me because of your little stunt last night. They fired you because you were helping your boyfriend commit crimes. I just made sure everyone knew about it. I never helped him with anything illegal. The security footage says otherwise. You want to keep lying, or do you want to start dealing with reality?" Silence on the other end, then, "This isn't over." "No," I agreed. "It's not." But it was about to get a lot more interesting. The security footage Tony had recovered was even more damaging than I'd hoped. Hours of Max and Saddie working together after hours, accessing client files, making copies of confidential documents, and celebrating their discoveries with champagne and increasingly intimate encounters on the conference room table. But the real revelation came when I studied the dates and cross-referenced them with Max's property purchases. The pattern was clear. Every shell company acquisition had been preceded by Saddie accessing files from clients who owned adjacent properties or had inside knowledge of upcoming development projects. They hadn't just been having an affair, they'd been running a sophisticated insider trading operation using confidential client information. I was reviewing the evidence when AJ showed up at my house, looking like he'd been awake for days. "Dad, we need to talk." "About what?" "About the fact that Mom's been calling me crying for the past 3 days. About the fact that half the town thinks you've lost your mind. About the fact that you're destroying people's lives for revenge." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw Saddie's eyes staring back at me with disappointment and concern. "Sit down," I said. AJ took a seat at the kitchen table, the same table where Saddie and I had shared 20 years of meals and conversations and slowly growing silences. "Your mother cheated on me," I said. "Not just emotionally, not just physically, but professionally. She helped her boyfriend commit crimes using information stolen from his clients. People trusted them, and they betrayed that trust for money and intimacy. I know what she did was wrong. Do you? Do you really understand what this means? Max used inside information to buy properties, then manipulated the zoning process to increase their value. He made millions of dollars by screwing over his own clients and the people of this town." AJ was quiet for a moment. "So, you decided to destroy them both?" "I decided to make sure the truth came out. Everything else is just consequences." "And what about your consequences, Dad? What happens when this is all over and you're alone in this house with nothing but your anger and your need for revenge?" It was a fair question, and I didn't have a good answer. That evening, I drove to the abandoned lakeside cabin where this whole mess had started. The rental company had shut it down after the incident with the fish guts and gasoline, but the building was still there, sitting empty among the pine trees like a monument to bad decisions. I was sitting on the dock, watching the sun set over the water, when I heard footsteps behind me. "I figured I'd find you here." I turned to see Denise approaching, but she looked different. Gone was the designer suit and perfect hair. Instead, she wore jeans and a sweater, and her face showed signs of stress and sleepless nights. "Come to threaten me again?" I asked. "Come to tell you the truth." She sat down beside me on the dock, close enough that I could smell her perfume, different from before, less expensive, more human. "The truth about what?" "About why Saddie really started sleeping with Max, about why I've been trying so hard to protect them, about why you need to stop before this gets any worse." I waited. "It was my idea," Denise said quietly. "The whole thing. The affair, the property deals, all of it. That got my attention." "What are you talking about?" 3 years ago, you cost me my job at the Portland firm. Remember? You found out I was skimming money from client accounts and you reported me to the state bar." I did remember. Denise had been working at a big Portland law firm handling estate cases, and she'd been stealing from elderly clients' accounts. I'd discovered it by accident when she'd asked me to do some work on her boat and paid me with a check that bounced. When I investigated, I found a pattern of financial irregularities that I'd felt obligated to report. "You destroyed my career," Denise continued. "I lost my job, my reputation, my fiancé. I had to start over in a small town, working for peanuts at a second-rate firm." "You destroyed your own career by stealing from old people." "Maybe, but you're the one who made sure everyone knew about it. You could have come to me first, given me a chance to make things right. Instead, you went straight to the authorities. Because you were stealing from clients who trusted you. And because you've always thought you were better than everyone else. The noble fisherman, the honest working man, too pure to be corrupted by money or ambition." I was starting to understand. "So you decided to corrupt my wife instead." I decided to show you what it felt like to lose everything. Saddie was unhappy, feeling ignored and unappreciated. Max was greedy and ambitious. It wasn't hard to push them together. You orchestrated the affair. I encouraged it. I facilitated it. I helped them rationalize it. And when Max started talking about his property investment ideas, I helped Saddie see how she could contribute. By stealing confidential information. By sharing knowledge that was going to waste. Saddie's brilliant, Jake. She was wasting her talents on routine legal work when she could have been making real money, building real wealth. I stared at Denise, trying to process what she was telling me. You destroyed my marriage to get revenge for something that happened 3 years ago. I destroyed your marriage to show you what consequences look like. You cost me everything I'd worked for. I wanted you to know how that felt. And Max? Saddie? What about what this cost them? Collateral damage. They made their own choices. I stood up, suddenly feeling the need to put distance between us. You're insane. I'm thorough, just like you were when you investigated my finances, just like you've been with your revenge campaign. This is different. Is it? You've systematically destroyed Max's reputation, cost Saddie her job, and turned half the town against them. How is that different from what I did to you? I didn't have an answer for that. The difference, Denise continued, is that I'm offering you a way out. Stop now. Let the state investigation run its course. Let Max and Saddie face the legal consequences of their actions. But stop the personal vendetta before it destroys you too. And if I don't? Then you'll find out that you're not the only one who knows how to dig up secrets. She stood and walked back toward her car, leaving me alone on the dock with the truth and the growing realization that I'd been playing someone else's game all along. But the game wasn't over yet. The next morning brought news that Max had been arrested. The state attorney general's office had moved faster than anyone expected, charging him with fraud, corruption, and money laundering. Saddie hadn't been arrested, but she was named as a co-conspirator and would likely face charges soon. I should have felt satisfied. Justice was being served, the truth was out, and the people who'd betrayed me were facing consequences. Instead, I felt empty, like I'd won a contest I'd never wanted to enter. That feeling lasted until I found my truck's tires slashed and "Psycho" spray-painted across the windshield. The annual Harborview block party was scheduled for that weekend, a tradition dating back 50 years, when the town actually had something to celebrate. Main Street would be closed to traffic, local businesses would set up booths, and the whole community would gather to pretend they still liked each other. This year, I decided to make it memorable. I spent 3 days preparing. Phone calls to old contacts, favors called in, documents gathered and organized. If Denise wanted to play games with people's lives, I was going to show her what a real game looked like. The block party started at noon on Saturday. By 12:30, I was standing on the makeshift stage they'd erected in front of the town hall, holding a microphone and looking out at a crowd of several hundred people. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, thank you for coming out today. I know we're here to celebrate our community, but I think it's time we had an honest conversation about what kind of community we really are. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see Saddie and Denise standing near the back, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. 3 days ago, Max Maxwell was arrested for fraud and corruption. Some of you were his clients. Some of you lost money because of his crimes. All of you deserve to know the truth about how this happened. I pulled out a thick folder of documents. See, Max didn't work alone. He had help from my wife, Jake Morrison, who provided him with confidential client information. But Saddie didn't act alone either. She was manipulated, encouraged, and guided by someone who had a very specific agenda. Denise started pushing through the crowd, probably trying to reach the stage, but Frankie and Tony were there to intercept her. Denise Crawford orchestrated this entire scheme as revenge against me for reporting her embezzlement 3 years ago. She deliberately destroyed my marriage, corrupted my wife, and enabled Max's crimes just to get back at me for doing the right thing. I held up bank records, emails, phone logs, everything Tony and I had gathered over the past week. But that's not even the best part. See, while Denise was busy playing puppet master with other people's lives, she was also skimming money from Blackstone and Associates' client accounts. Again, same crime, different firm. The crowd was getting restless now, angry murmurs growing louder. Several of Blackstone's clients were pushing forward, demanding to see the evidence. "Oh, and there's one more thing," I continued, pulling out a manila envelope I'd been saving for last. "DNA test results. Turns out my son AJ isn't actually my biological child. Saddie's been keeping that secret for 21 years. The crowd went silent. Saddie's face went white. AJ, who was standing near the front, looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. The real father? Thomas Brennan, senior partner at the Portland firm where Saddie worked before we moved to Harborview. Married man, 3 kids of his own, and apparently quite generous with his DNA. I could see AJ pushing through the crowd toward the stage, his face a mix of confusion and rage. Saddie was crying openly now, and Denise had stopped trying to reach me and was instead backing toward the street. So there you have it, folks, your legal community in all its glory: fraud, corruption, adultery, embezzlement, and 21 years of paternity lies, all orchestrated by people you trusted with your most important legal matters. Max appeared at the edge of the crowd, apparently out on bail, and started shouting something about defamation and lawsuits. But his voice was drowned out by the angry crowd of former clients, who were now demanding answers and refunds. "But wait," I said, holding up my hand for silence. "There's more." I pulled out one final document. Turns out Denise has been planning to disappear with about $2 million in client funds. I found plane tickets to the Cayman Islands, bank transfer authorizations, and a very detailed exit strategy. She was going to let Max and Saddie take the fall for everything while she retired to a beach somewhere. The crowd erupted. Several people started chanting for Denise's arrest. Others were demanding to see their client files. The whole thing was turning into a mob scene. That's when Max made his move. He pushed through the crowd, climbed onto the stage, and tried to tackle me. But 20 years of physical labor had left me stronger than a lawyer who got his exercise at a country club gym. I sidestepped his clumsy charge and watched him stumble into the microphone stand. "Easy there, Romeo," I said, helping him to his feet. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself before your trial." Max swung at me, a wild haymaker that missed by 6 inches. I caught his wrist and twisted just enough to make him yelp, the same move I'd used at the cabin months ago. "You know what your problem is, Max? You think money makes you tough, but money just makes you soft." I released his wrist and gave him a gentle push. He stumbled backward, lost his balance, and fell directly into the dunking booth the fire department had set up for charity fundraising. The crowd cheered as Max surfaced, sputtering and humiliated, his expensive suit ruined and his dignity in tatters. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what justice looks like in Harborview, Maine. I dropped the microphone and walked off the stage, leaving behind the chaos I'd created and the ruins of the life I'd once known. As I reached my truck, AJ caught up with me. "Dad," he said, and I could hear the pain in his voice. "Is it true? About you not being my real father?" I looked at the young man I'd raised, the son I'd taught to fish and fight and fix engines, and realized that DNA didn't matter nearly as much as I'd thought it would. "Biology doesn't make you my son, AJ. 21 years of love and arguments and teaching you how to drive stick shift. That's what makes you my son." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and hugged me like he had when he was little and afraid of thunderstorms. "What happens now?" he asked. I looked back at the chaos on Main Street, where police cars were arriving and Denise was being led away in handcuffs, where Saddie sat on the curb, crying into her hands, and Max was still dripping wet from the dunking booth. Now we go home and figure out what comes next. As we drove away from the wreckage of my old life, I realized that revenge had tasted exactly like I'd expected it to: bitter, satisfying, and ultimately empty. But sometimes empty was better than betrayed. Sometimes justice was just another word for choosing your own ending. The war was over. I'd won, but I wasn't sure what the prize was supposed to be. Behind us, Harborview burned with gossip and scandal and the ashes of secrets that should have stayed buried. Ahead of us lay whatever came after revenge. I was finally ready to find out.